We are live. We had a little problem starting our little opening graphic, but at HC Highlanders Live is on the air. Thank you for joining us again, Jason Muker, joined by Matthew Webb. We have officially kicked off our spring seasons. It doesn't look too much like spring out there right now. Very white, except where they're plowing the field, which is kudos out to our facility crew for getting our outdoor teams out there so they can practice. Yeah, we started practice, bunch of teams yesterday, a couple more on Monday, and a couple more yesterday, and then a few more are going to kind of start in the coming weeks. And I'll let Matt talk a little bit about that. Had a great staff meeting this morning. It's always good to patch you guys into what's going on here in our department. We were talking a little bit about recruiting, met with the admission office, and those types of connections that we have that we can make, amongst ourselves, but also with other key groups across campus is something that kind of is important to us. It's important for the college, especially when it comes to recruiting and enrollment, and some positive things coming out of our admission office and enrollment and deposits coming in for student athletes for our different teams. So despite all the negativity and the things about athletics and things that are going around in terms of COVID, and we're trucking along here, and things are positive in terms of our recruitment outlook for teams and for our current student athletes who are here right now. And I'll let Matt talk a little bit about that, and he'll introduce our guest for tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So we had a great meeting this morning. One of the things we continue to work on, and we tend to be so focused on COVID and pulling things off for this spring, which are starting to come to fruition. Our teams are practicing, and we're outside, and we're plowing the fields and so forth. But another whole thing that actually our guest, who I'm going to introduce here in a second, helps to lead the discussion for our department is just continuing to strategize about how best to recruit. We institutionally, many of you know, we had a tuition reset this year, so a completely different model in terms of financial aid for students coming to Houghton. And so it's a different kind of conversation in the recruiting world. And so we just had a great meeting this morning with staff from a variety of different offices on campus, from our retention area, from financial aid, from admission, and all of our coaches, just talking about how do we best strategize and how do we have those conversations, which are different now than what we've had in the past. So it's just real good discussions there. And like Jason said, we're kicking things off. It's I'm again really thankful for the conference that we're in and the leadership there. Collectively, our institutions are continue to be supportive of one another and collaboratively coming to agreement on how we're going to do things to make things work. And so we've got very consistent policies amongst our colleagues in the Empire 8 in terms of our testing procedures, our travel policies, meals on the road, just a lot of detail of how we make things work and mitigate contact tracing if we have a positive case on campus, which we will for sure, and in fact we have with some of our students thus far. There've been a few cases that the first 2 weeks as we tested everybody on campus. So it's going to happen, and it's a matter of managing that well and being as safe as we can. So all of our teams are practicing now. The first couple weeks of practice are with distance, and we're masking all the time when we practice, even for the rest of the year. But it's good to see the athletes back at it and practicing again with the hope and optimism of having games as soon as within the next 3 weeks, beginning of March, our first scheduled games. I think Jason could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's our basketball program, which maybe has the very first game on the schedule. So we're looking forward to that. So our guest this evening is Coach Brian Reitnour. He's our baseball coach. And Coach Reitnour has been here actually since the beginning of adding baseball. He's the only baseball coach we've had since we added it 9 years ago. Well, I guess maybe that's not entirely accurate. We had baseball years ago in somewhat of a capacity, and you weren't coaching back then, Brian. But
no, but I do remember some of it.
But you do remember some of it. Some real specific ground. I mean, there was a big tree in left field, if I remember right, on the field that we played at. So
On the field hockey scoreboard.
There you go. Well, welcome, Brian, and maybe just a brief introduction. Again, he's been our coach since we started baseball 9 years ago. Brian's an excellent recruiter. Has done really well in terms of bringing in athletes to be part of his program, and I get real excited when I hear about what Coach Reitnour is doing with his team. It's what we want to be in Houghton in athletics to our athletes and for our athletes, and that has a lot to do with creating a culture of trust, of loyalty, of camaraderie. I was privileged to hear his sort of first preseason talk to his team the other night before their practice started. And I actually captured the majority of that on video, and we may be sharing that through some of our outlets here, because in my mind, it really captures everything that we want to be. We want to do things different. We want to do things right. We want to be a team that's loyal, that plays with integrity, and that looks out for our brothers or our sisters in other sports. So, but maybe I've pumped you up real big here, Brian. So you're gonna have to live up to that. But I'd like to just give our listeners maybe some background in terms of who you are. If you wouldn't mind just sort of starting a little bit, how'd you end up at Houghton as our baseball coach? What was sort of your path to where you're at now? And maybe if you wouldn't mind, just why is it that you love to coach? I know you love to coach, and I know you love baseball, but I think more than even baseball, I think you love to coach. You love working with the young men that you do. And what is it that motivates you and drives you to that passion? But start with how you got here, and maybe end with that.
Sure. I mean, quite honestly, my path is incredibly long and windy. So I'll try to summarize this as best I can in a short period of time. But my family moved to Houghton, or Houghton Fillmore, when I was 2 years old. My dad had left the family, and so my mom and my 3 siblings and I were all living in my grandparents' house. And there was a missionary couple, Hirsch and Sammy Reese, that was visiting our home church in Pennsylvania, and talking about what they were doing in Sierra Leone. And they had dinner at my grandparents' house. And after talking about my mom's situation, they said, we think Kathy ought to move to Houghton, and that she should go back to school, and that the community will help raise the kids. And that's really what happened. So, I mean, I still remember as a little kid, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I would go to Linda Lex's and Beth Beardsley's and Aunt Sammy's house. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to class with my mom. And growing up, like, single mom with 4 kids, it was tough. Although I never knew any better, because the Houghton community really took care of us. They always provided food and Christmas presents and meals at Thanksgiving, and I never lacked for anything. And there were several men who really stepped into my life in the area, who really helped to raise me. And so Houghton became a really special place for me growing up. The problem was, and I remember this, I said, I remember the old baseball field. I remember the old cage in Nielsen where they used to practice. I knew Tom Kettlecamp, who coached the team for a number of years, and they got rid of baseball in 1987. So growing up, Houghton was never really a consideration for me as an institution. My mom graduated from Houghton. My oldest brother graduated from Houghton, and he played soccer here. And, my wife graduated from Houghton too. But for me, I wanted to play baseball. And so I ended up going to a school in Indiana, and then eventually I transferred to Messiah College, where I graduated from. And education has always been a really important part of my life. And so I'm double majored in English, literature, and education. After college, I taught for 3 years and coached high school baseball and middle school soccer in North Carolina. I lived with my oldest brother and his wife at the time. And eventually I really discovered that I loved teaching, but I didn't really like my job. And my old college coach had kind of been hounding me, hey, why don't you come back and get your feet wet in this area? So I did. I went back to Messiah, and I coached there for 2 years and lived in some really sketchy places on my $2,000 a year salary. And eventually I had a conversation with him about, I think I might want to do this for a living. What do you think I need to do? And he said, well, you need to get a master's degree. And I had a conversation with the athletic director there, and he said, yeah, you need to get a master's degree. And here are some options that I think will benefit you. And I contacted the head coach at Geneva College, Alan Sumner, and said, have you ever had a graduate assistant? And he said, no, but I'd love to talk about it. And so he created a graduate assistant position for me there, where I got to explore the ideas of higher education and learning. And I got to weave in a lot of my personal interests in agriculture and environmental studies and different types of literature into that program, and coach baseball. And then after that was done, I had gotten married while I was in graduate school, and I told my wife that I wouldn't move her to Texas or Washington or something like that to pursue my baseball dreams. And so for a while, I gave up on those, and we moved back to her parents' place for about 6 months. And I worked on a couple of different farms, and really enjoyed that time. But during that time, she got pregnant and said, okay, you need to get a real job. So I applied for a bunch of different positions, and eventually I took a job as an assistant coach at Allegheny College in Western Pennsylvania in Meadville. And I was there for 3 years. And then at the end of that 3 years, they had hired a new head coach, and he wanted to move in a different direction. And so I really had to evaluate at that time, what is it that I really love doing? What is it about coaching that I really love doing? Is it, and basically the conclusion I came to is that what I really love is I like working with college age students, because it's a formative time in their life. And I had done some work in residence life and in other areas of student life and really enjoyed that too. And so I applied for the career services job at Houghton, and I interviewed with Dan Noyes, and really developed a real connection with Dan. And we moved back, and that was quite a transitional move for us. And my brother Matt was still working here in admissions at the time, and we were coaching our club baseball team, which was really just a part-time, almost recreational situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed that. And I really loved my work in career services too, because it gave me a breadth of knowledge, or a breadth of contact with students. And I got to mentor them in different ways. But then I was about 1.5 years into that position when Matt called me, and he said, I was having a conversation with Skip Lord, who was our athletic director at the time, and they're considering adding baseball and softball to Houghton. And he told Skip, he's like, you should really talk to my brother about this. He's got a lot of college baseball experience. And so I over the next week, started compiling reasons and paperwork on why adding baseball and softball would be a good idea for Houghton. And apparently he bought it. So, and I still remember, this is when you were coaching soccer. He invited me down to watch a men's soccer game, and he and I were standing along the fence behind your benches. And he said, what do you think about becoming the coach of our first baseball team? And I said, I think that's a great idea, but I'm going to go talk to my wife about it and see what she thinks. So, and honestly, I think, my wife's experience with coaching in the previous years had been strenuous. It was really time consuming. And what I told her was, I think this will be different. This is a different environment. It's more family based. We can be involved in this together, and I can set more of my own hours. And so I think that was transitional and inspirational, and I think transformational for our family. And we've been here ever since. So I've been at Houghton now. This is my 12th year, and I've been the baseball coach. This is my 10th year. So.
Yeah, mentioning your wife being involved, I know in my years of coaching, that was an integral part of what I felt was important. A lot of what you said, I think I resonate. You and I are a bit of a kindred spirit, I think, in some of this. We've talked enough over the years. I think we agree on a lot in terms of this, but investing in the young men, in our case, it was men that we coached, was really, really important. And I always felt one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate and role model is, what does it mean to be a Christian husband? And you can say things, and I could sit down and tell people that, but I always felt the best way to sort of role model that was for them to see me in that role. So that meant, having athletes in our home and having my wife around. And in some of my earlier years in coaching, she'd travel with us, and when our kids were really little. But my wife became an important part of the equation of me being the coach, and our family, for that matter, too, our kids. So they saw me in the role as a father also, which is more important than being a coach. So, no, that's good to hear. Brian, let me ask a question. I heard you talk yesterday to your team, and you tend to reference animals and livestock quite a bit, and probably use animal analogies a lot. So you talked about eating an elephant and eating a moose and capturing a 50-pound coyote, and the idea that, if I'm going to try and eat an elephant, I can't do it myself. If I try and eat an elephant myself, much of it's just going to go to waste because it's impossible. And I need to share it. We need to share the wealth with our team. Talk with me a little bit about that analogy. What was it you were sharing with your team when you were talking about that?
So we've had this phrase, Coach Kenny kind of introduced this phrase to us a few years back about how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And our guys have kind of adopted that phrase, that when we're faced with what seems like an insurmountable task, you can't focus on the whole thing. And so it started with that, but I've been thinking about that phrase a little bit more recently in terms of what it takes to do this together, and how so much of what we do is about teaching young men that independence is good, but interdependence and community is better. And we need both. We need you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, but we really need to be able to do this together. And understanding that so much of what has gone on in each of our lives, we can't pay back, but we can pay forward. And so I think the concept of right now, in everything that's gone on in 2020 and in 2021 now, and all of the stuff that our student athletes are facing, like, I've had so many guys that have just talked to me about they're dealing with a lot. It creates anxiety. It creates a sense of being overwhelmed. And I just want to encourage them, like, let's build each other up in this. You can't do this by yourself, and that's okay. We're not supposed to. And that what is most important about what we do here collectively is about teaching you lessons that you're going to take with you for the rest of your life. So when you're faced with insurmountable tasks, like, and I think we struggle with this as men, you've got to lean on your brothers, and you've got to recognize, like, let me share this burden with you. And one of the things we emphasize with our guys all the time is to recognize, keep your eyes and ears open. Your college experience isn't just about you. You have to learn to acquire the skills to be a servant and to allow yourself to be served. And that's really difficult. So I think that's one of the things that we've developed in the team culture that is special and unique, and that I enjoy being around every day. I love seeing our guys reach out into the community and help people who need assistance when they recognize the needs. And what I've really been proud of, both like outside of Houghton's walls, but also like inside of them, when they see, that their brother is wrestling with these things, and then actually asking how he's doing and wanting to know. The critical listening part of things can be really difficult for us too, because we always want to think about the next thing that we're going to say. So, I think I was trying to get at that a bit last night, and then because I heard somebody recently talk about that analogy about how human beings have developed a sense of sportsmanship and fair play, and why that's important, and like it's important that people will actually want to continue playing with you as you go, and yet I think as Christians there's a call to bite off even a little bit more than that, and it's not just a tit for tat reciprocal relationship that we're dealing with, and that as Christians I think we are called to serve others who can't pay us back, and to love even our enemies. And I think that's what's unique and different. And then that there are reasons for that. I actually listened to Sean McDowell today talking about how, if he were going to make up a religion, he wouldn't have made up Christianity, and I think there's something to that. But when we actually stop and look at how does this affect our lives, I think it makes a profound difference. There really is a profound difference when we do it the way that Jesus asked us to.
Yeah, you gave you hit on another thing last night or 2 nights ago, when you were talking with the guys. And again, it was something else. Something I really resonated with, because I can very specifically remember a time you talked about. You sort of challenged them a little bit in terms of accepting what role they're going to be given, and some of you guys, maybe even some of you seniors, may have, some of you who've started may get a starting position taken from you by a younger player, and how are you going to respond? And you sort of identified 2 particular situations. One, they're both alumni now, but for me, that was not too many years ago. But Luke Ogden, who's now our assistant coach with the men's soccer team, his senior year, the position as goalkeeper was probably his, but we also brought in Jacob Dunnett, who I think will go down as probably one of the best goalkeepers Houghton's ever had.
Yeah.
And it became pretty clear to Luke after just a few days of preseason that Jacob's probably going to be the one who's going to play. And I think he wrestled with that, but came to terms with it and became the best teammate, and then actually became Jacob's coach in years after. You mentioned two equations, and I'd just be interested in hearing you talk a little bit about the guy who lost his position to the young kid who came up and took it from him. But you mentioned Pat Patterson, and Tage Johnson came in and took his job at first base. And then you mentioned David Wessels, who's actually a senior now. He took Tanner Hoffman's job at some point in Tanner's career. Talk a little bit about just who Pat was and who Tanner was and how they handled that. Because that, to me as a coach, I mean, I loved all the guys I played with. But, man, those guys, they're never going to be in the record books. But in a coach's heart and memory, those guys are etched in our memory so much. Those guys are the glue that make teams work.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just talk with us a little bit about Pat and Tanner and what they did for David and Tage.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes them so special to me personally and to their teammates, is that they epitomized everything that we've tried to teach. And both of them never took a day off. They never felt sorry for themselves. They didn't sulk. And I mean, having to tell Pat that he wasn't going to be our starting first baseman was one of the most heartbreaking experiences I've ever had. But Tage Johnson holds most of the offensive records in our program's history in the past 10 years. Like, I think he holds something like 15 different offensive records.
Mm-hmm.
He was a really good hitter. And basically what Pat took upon himself was to recognize that what he had thought he wanted wasn't going to be what was best for our team. And he died to himself. He took up that burden that I gave to him, and he carried it like unbelievably. And he went above and beyond everything that I asked him to do. So he came to practice every day, and he threw extra balls to Tage. He helped him with his ground ball footwork, like everything that I couldn't do because I was working with a different position group. I took upon himself. And I don't think you can ask more of anybody than to do those things. Like, he became more valuable to our team as that guy for demonstrating to these young guys what it means to take on different roles in your life. Because I think so many of us, we grow up with this idea that we want to be the star, we want to be the center of attention. And so often Christ asks us to do something else, to kill our ego and to take on something bigger. And
well, and I think it's hard for a young person to understand that too. I mean, that's unique from Pat to understand that role is important. I've talked with players over the years where this has happened, and to me, soccer was what I coached. The backup goalie might be one of the most important players on a team, but to the backup goalie, who you never really sub the goalkeeper position, they're never going to get in the game. That they don't understand that. Or I shouldn't say that. That's hard for them to understand. And I've had that discussion with athletes. You'll understand this when you're a coach someday, the value of that role. But sorry, I interrupted you, but
I think that's exactly right. And I think what young guys on our team really needed to see, we went through this when we read the captain class, and we talked about the water carriers. Both Pat and Tanner were water carriers. They're both incredibly intelligent guys. I mean, like Tanner, he could have gone to medical school if he wanted to, but he decided, and this is part of what Tanner's story is. And like Pat is now, he's a part-time pastor, and Tanner works for the Ugandan Water Project, giving clean water to poverty-stricken people in Uganda. And they've devoted their life to serving other people, and they have taken on the role of Christ. And I think that's what's so special about this is that. So I had one of my guys after practice on Monday. He was just sharing a story with me about where he's at in his life now, and he said, I said to him, I think it's paradoxical that I am a baseball coach who gets really excited when my players no longer hold baseball as the most important thing in their life. And I think I don't know a lot of other coaches that are like that. I mean, I know there are coaches like that, but I don't think there's a lot that want their players to grow out of baseball. And that's really what I want for my guys. Like, I want them to grow out of that because I think there's more for them in life. And he said back to me, he's like, I remember you told me once that you're not a baseball coach, you're a life coach who loves baseball. I said, yeah, I think that's really how I would classify myself. I think I'm an educator first and foremost. And my classroom is I teach guys about life. And we use baseball as the tool because there's few things in my life that I love more. But I also get the opportunity to fold in philosophy and psychology and literature and music and physics and biology and like all of these other things about life that I love. I get to do that on a daily basis. Like, so I love my job. I think it's great.
Yeah.
And I think we get to see how it affects those other guys. So like Tanner Hoffman actually called me this past summer, and he wanted to interview me about what makes my view of leadership different. And like the conversation that he and I had about that was what will stand out for me for a long, long time, and that was special because now he said, I'm in a position where I get to lead other people. And you go through college and you spend a lot of your life thinking about your own classes and developing yourself. And now he's in a position where he gets to help develop other people so that they can make an impact in the world. And I think that's just phenomenal. And I honestly believe that him going through that experience his senior year where he had to die to his selfish ambitions was probably pretty profound in that process.
Yeah. Well, this is really good stuff. I mean, this is why we coach. Brian, I'm just really proud of the coach that you are, and your good friend also, and colleague and friend, and your investment in the lives of the young men you coach is just really significant. And it's what all our coaches do. It looks a little different. Every coach can take on their own personality. The way I am, the way I would interact with my players is going to be different than. I'm not as philosophical as you are, or as Amish. So there you go. But boy, that foundational piece is is consistent in terms of who we are here, and it's something that I just really love about what we do. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The thing that makes me the happiest as a former coach is seeing the young guys that I got to coach become husbands, become parents, and embrace those roles, because those roles are so much more important than being a soccer player or baseball player or whatever it means. I like how you said it. You want to see them grow out of being a baseball player. I've said this to athletes before. I said, soccer is going to eventually let you down. Soccer, the sport will eventually let you down. Part of it, you're going to get too old. You're not going to be able to play it anymore. It's going to let you down. But God will never let you down. And the roles that God has ordained, I think, through Scripture, of being a husband, he speaks about that in Scripture. Of being a father, he speaks about that in Scripture. Those are God ordained sort of institutions. Those are things, and ultimately God will never let you down. But it's easy to put our faith and our identity in the sport we coach or play, but we can't do that because that's not being a soccer player is not God ordained. He doesn't talk about that in Scripture, right? I believe heaven's going to be full of soccer fields myself, but that's not God ordained. So, well, Brian, I appreciate it. We need to wrap up, and you've got to get to practice here in a few minutes. I know you've got a late night practice tonight, so enjoy being with your team. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.